Welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Buzz podcast. We're very happy that you're joining us, especially because it's Christmas week. We're celebrating Christmas this coming weekend. And so thanks for making time to join us on the podcast this week. My name is Father Daniele, and I'm joined, as always, by these two Christmas elves, Josh Sullivan
Hello.
and Matt Van Milligan.
Hello.
Welcome to you guys.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you, although we're still a little bit
before.
before there.
I still wish people Merry
You're
Christmas.
in the Christmas spirit.
Yeah, I wish people Merry Christmas. I think people still are a little scared. They want to wish like the Happy Holidays because we're told that's prim and proper now.
Yeah.
But I think people are now rebelling against that Happy Holidays and starting to wish people Merry Christmas on purpose. Like that's the rebellious thing to do, you know?
Yeah, I was doing my Christmas shopping, and everywhere I went, I would say Merry Christmas. And it was, and I always got a Merry Christmas back, right? But it was like they refrained from saying it or resisted from saying it until I said it first. They were like, "What is this? What is this guy's deal?
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
is he a Christmas celebrator?" Is that,
I wonder how much of it is after all this kind of like lockdown and isolation. People are just happy to be acknowledged by another human being. They just respond with
That's
true.
so
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you were saying Merry Christmas to your self-checkout machines.
Yeah,
Is that
for
what
sure.
you-
Yeah. I was talking to the self-checkout. That's what I was doing. Actually, I did get this is off topic, but I did get one of those. Please rate us on your receipt. You'll see you have a survey. Please call and rate us at your whatever. And I my wife, I was shopping with my wife, was like, "Oh yeah, my cashier was amazing." like how do you rate those things?
I saw this meme online where it's like we're all invited to the staff Christmas party because we're all using the self-checkout machines.
I like that. I like that. Do we get benefits?
Yeah. Well, we are obviously in the Christmas spirit since we're enjoying ourselves right here. But today, it's no surprise what we're talking about. We're talking about Christmas and some of the events leading up to Christmas, Christmas itself. And
All things Christmas.
All things Christmas, right? And I think it's important because sometimes we just get in the habit of doing things as Catholics, right? We know Christmas is coming. We go through the Advent period. We celebrate Christmas, but do we know all the details? Do we know, did Christmas just come out of nowhere and happen? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But there's lots to talk about Christmas. So where do you guys want to start?
Well, I think we should start at where Christmas came from. Because if we don't know where Christmas came from, like, when did Christmas happen? Right? And I think that's kind of, or we can talk about
Go for it.
Well, Christmas didn't just start. We had to have a reason. And we know that there's a reason and that there's a true reason behind the start of Christmas. Not necessarily the December 25th that we talk about, but what we're celebrating on December 25th, which is the birth of Christ. We know that Christ was born, that he was a true historical figure, and this is from sources outside of the Bible, right? We have things from Roman historians, we have from Jewish people of the day that wrote down scripture outside of the Bible and Christian influences that said that Jesus was a person in there. So we know that
for people to say that Jesus did not exist is ludicrous.
Exactly.
I mean, there's enough historical evidence outside of the Bible.
And so his birthday's there. Like, we know. What we don't necessarily know is when his birthday was.
Right.
And so if we go back, we talked about it on our last Christmas episode, I think, things about the positioning of the stars and what the Star of Bethlehem could be and all that kind of stuff. So there's talk about whether it could be anywhere from May, potentially, to even October, depending on which sources you're using based on historical facts, potentially, and who was reigning at the time, or like astronomy, not astrological, astronomy. And where the stars were aligned at that time, not for any magical purposes, but it would line up to say that there was a king of Judah in the east, potentially.
So why December 25th then? Why did we choose December 25th?
Matt?
Well, I know that St. Augustine,
Yeah.
right? St. Augustine, first of all, I think it was chosen because of the winter solstice, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Because St. Augustine said they chose the date because it was the shortest of all days, right? And then from there, from the birth of Christ, the growth comes. I think that's what St. Augustine had said.
Yeah, and we talked about it in a previous podcast. Like you'll hear these arguments around the dinner table sometimes of people who aren't with us in the event of the incarnation. But they'll say, oh, well, like Christmas has just been co-opted from other. From other pagan religions, or that they just took this thing that was happening and just rebranded it as kind of Christmas or as a Christian thing. And I think we said that, every ancient religion, every ancient calendar, whether or not it's tied to a world religion, has a midwinter feast, because the old calendars they don't have refrigeration. Like you have kind of feast famine periods that follow natural cycles that, if something is close to this date, it usually falls into that calendar of celebration.
And going off both of those, so you have a bunch of food, and now you have the shortest day of the year. From now on, the days get longer, get bigger. Mm-hmm. There's more. So if you think of it, we come out of the dark period. Now we're going into the light period.
Exactly.
And that's where we talk about. So that's what we did in the history of the church. We went from the dark period without Christ, without God's true presence in front of us. And then we have now the light, which is God's presence. So that's where Christmas falls into the winter solstice celebrations, all the celebrations, the winter celebrations, if we want to call it that. And that's where the church kind of pops it in there. It just fits. Boom, Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, I think that's where we say Christmas starts there. We know now that Jesus probably wasn't even born. Like I always used to think he was born on 0 AD, BC, whatever that, where that is.
Yeah.
It's actually like 2 years before, 3 years or 4 years in like 4 BC. So like 4 years before we think he's actually born.
Yeah. So obviously the calendar was reset sort of thing to reflect the birth of Jesus, but after looking at it a little more, they felt that they got the year wrong.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So anywhere I think from 4 BC to zero in that range was Jesus was born. A lot of people don't know that. I know, talking to parishioners, talking to students, the year comes from just like, the short day, things grow longer. They reset the calendar. This is 2021 years since the birth of Jesus. Give or take.
Give or take.
A year or two.
I was going to say, you have to remember, things weren't really, there's a lot of things written down, but no things were official in the church for about the first 300 years.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like a lot of things were oral tradition.
You're working with a number of different calendars.
That's
so
right.
Different cultures, different calendars. The Romans had a different calendar. And these calendars weren't entirely accurate because you're dealing with what they thought was a geocentric cosmology. So they
didn't realize it's the sun.
So then once you have kind of the Copernican Revolution and you have kind of reliable ways of keeping time, and you actually account for leap years and those cosmological events, then you can have more accurate kind of dating processes. But when you're trying to find out what exact date something happened in an ancient calendar, it becomes pretty messy pretty quickly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think it's okay. So let's call to mind what it is about Christmas. A lot of people say, kids, they say it's the birthday of Jesus, like we're lighting candles for Jesus every time. And sure, we're acknowledging a birthday because that's, a popular thing to do in our culture is to acknowledge people's birthday and whatever it might be, right? But this event, this Jesus event, is more than just looking back and lighting a candle.
A singularity of history.
Yeah.
Yes,
that it's
exactly.
like the incarnation as an event. Like we talked in previous episodes about kind of the anticipation or the lead up to the event of the incarnation wasn't just kind of a reactionary thing. Like if you look at the narrative arc of the Old Testament, it's not as though like God is like kind of making it up as he goes along.
Yeah.
And then he's like, okay, well, they rebelled again. What are we going to do now? And especially when you take into account the fact that the Bible itself, like Biblia is plural, that this is taken from a number of books, a number of sources that have been written over the course of hundreds and arguably, the better part of 1,500 years, that all of these are pointing to the incarnation as an event that is going to make sense of the whole salvation story.
You hear it right from Genesis, right? That we talk about the woman's offspring is going to crush the head of the snake, which is the devil. Well, it could be literal, but more if you look at it in what it could mean, like that's Jesus. That's
Yeah, and who were some of the prophets that talked about the coming of Messiah? I know during Advent we read a lot from Isaiah.
Yeah,
right.
Mm-hmm.
So Isaiah is the one that we focus on a lot before Christmas because we're preparing the way of the Lord. We're anticipating the Lord's arrival.
Yeah, so you'd say all of the major prophets. I guess you have
major prophets and minor prophets.
Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Nehemiah. That they're pointing. That's where you start getting specifics. that this is going to be born of a virgin. This is what it's going to look like. This is our way out of our current kind of situation, because you have, not to go through the whole kind of narrative arc of the Old Testament, but they're in many cases they're in exile. They're in exile from either the Babylonians, the Assyrians. They've lost their inheritance, so to speak. They've lost their land, and but they still have the covenant promise that God made them. So there's like, how do we, how is God going to reconcile us? And that's what the major prophets answer. That's the question they're faced with, and their answer is Jesus. Their answer is the incarnation.
So the Jewish people, they're praying for the coming of Messiah, right? They're praying for it. They're promised it. They're hearing the prophets speak about it, right? So they're anticipating that this Messiah is coming. When is it coming? There are people really living in anticipation, right? Yeah. And then this great event comes, the incarnation of Jesus, God becoming man, right? God becoming man here on earth, and time sort of stops, time resets, like we said. I'm thinking of the good Christmas hymn, Silent Night. It's just all quiet. It's like this event happens that changes the entire world. Now, the Jewish people obviously very familiar with the scriptures. Yeah. They're anticipating the coming of the Messiah. This event happens, right? So where is the difference here, or where is the separation of the
coming of the
Jewish
Messiah?
The coming of the Messiah, and not believing that Jesus was the Messiah?
Yeah, that's super interesting, because if you read any of the gospel accounts and the specific perspectives of the various gospel writers, kind of emphasize specific expectations that different groups had of Jesus. So that you have kind of clear prophecy about the Messiah coming, again, arguably as early as 600 BC. Right up into kind of Maccabees, which are some of the more recent Old Testament books to be written, that different groups have kind of latched on to different ideas of who the Messiah is expected to be, and in some cases have kind of reappropriated that idea for their own political agenda, their own. So you have people saying the Messiah is going to be a military leader. They're going to overthrow the Romans, and that's going to be God's fulfillment of the covenant. You have, you would say, kind of the more mainline, the Pharisaic interpretation that you have Ezekiel and Isaiah and Elijah being kind of the main sources there, that the lame are going to walk, the blind are going to see. These are going to be the marks that the Messiah has come to redeem Israel. So you have, very contending expectations of who the Messiah is going to be. And a lot of the questions that Jesus receives in the Gospels are them trying to feel out, them saying, okay, there are people saying that you're him. So we have these questions to kind of test that. One of the interesting examples of that is when John's disciples come to ask Jesus if he is the one to come or if they should wait for someone else. That and like, just again, a superficial reading, you're like, okay, does this mean that John, the first person to recognize Jesus as Jesus, as
jumping in the womb of Elizabeth,
is he doubting that Jesus is the Messiah?
Yeah.
But again, the sort of historical contextual reading is that this is something that Jewish rabbis would do all the time. They would send their disciples to question other rabbis. To reach their own conclusion rather than just kind of this strict.
Hear it from them. To go and discover it.
But so it's not necessarily an indication of doubt, but that Jesus responds. He says, he quotes Isaiah. He says, the lame walk, the blind see, the deaf hear. But then he says, blessed are those who don't fall away from me on account of this. And like, that seems strange. That it's like. You would expect that to be good news, or that like that's a cause. But most the main reference for that is, I think, Isaiah 35, but also in, I think, Isaiah 42. On top of that, it says, "And he will set the prisoner free." Yeah. So it's important to note that John is in jail. when they're asking this. So what they're asking is not necessarily, are you the Messiah? But if you're the Messiah, why is John in jail?
Can you free the prisoner here? Yeah.
So
yeah.
they're saying like that this isn't going to be everything that you expect, but I am him.
Yeah.
So yeah, and we talked in earlier episodes about like how indirectly or how often Jesus indirectly confirms that he's the Messiah, but leaves room for a person's faith
to figure it out.
to make that decision.
Wouldn't you say that we're saying the Jewish people are sort of contextualize Jesus, or maybe put some expectations on Jesus? I should say, right? They wanted him to be this or that.
Yeah.
So now we don't have. I mean, the first Christians obviously were Jewish, right? But we don't have. They're still Jews. There's still Jewish people around, right? So there are people who don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. They're still waiting for the Messiah to come. Wouldn't you say this is the problem today?
Yeah, I think so.
Like Christians do the same thing.
We put our own interpretation on what God's will was for. Like the Jewish people put in their own interpretation. Okay, so God is going to do it this way. Yeah. It's like you're telling God that this is the only way because I'm smart and I've had almost 40 years of experience living. I can tell you, God, this is the only way that this is possible to happen. And God came through. Like if you think about it, taking your lands back and all that kind of stuff. Well, look at the Christianity now and look at how many landowners, if you want to go off land, how much wider that Jerusalem's land is on the entire world. All that kind of stuff. But so like God's prophecy is fulfilled through Christ and through. But we do the same thing. We say, okay, God's promised this, God's promised that.
Yeah, people say like God doesn't exist because
he didn't fulfill my expectation.
God's not helping me with this particular part of my life.
And not realizing that it could be that God is helping you, but in a different way.
Sure. But this is kind of, what we do in our relationship with God. We put expectations on God. And that's not to say that we can't put expectations on God because throw your cares on me, says the Lord, right? But everything about God is just fascinating because what people are looking for this grandiose event when God comes into the world, and instead we have this baby born in this dirty stable,
cave
full of animals, quiet evening. Mary's given birth there. The animals are doing their thing, and so the expectations we have are so different from how God acts in the world.
And that's the whole Christmas story. I mean, they came. The wise men came seeking a king. They went to Herod, the king in the area, saying, "Where's your baby? We've got gifts." There's a whole, and then so there was this idea that what a king would be to the Jewish people, or to Judah, I think was specifically to the people of Judah, this is what a king would look like. And so they went to you don't have a king of the people of Judah. Okay, Herod's the king in the area. Okay, we'll go to Herod. And so they didn't realize that it was the complete opposite. He wasn't born in a palace full of people around and gold and everything. It was born in the lowest place possible, in a cave, potentially, in the bush, in a rock formation or maybe a wooden formation that was fed to animals, like dirtiest places that it could be.
I know. I love so let's picture the nativity scene. Everyone has one in their house or at church. I know it looks so beautiful. Like if you had to sleep in a barn. This is the barn I want to sleep in, right? But in actuality, it's like this disgusting cesspool of a place.
Oh
right? Where it's
there's
not
manure
clean.
And drool and liquids.
It's not pretty.
No.
Here's a woman, the Blessed Mother, giving birth. And
the water that would be around, just like you always think of someone giving birth, hot water. We need hot water. Like the water that would be there would be from a drinking trough,
right?
That would have potential diseases or whatever else in it. Like it wasn't a clean source of water, that's just because that's the reality of the situation.
And I love how the story of Christmas still reflects our relationship with the Lord today. Like you look at the journey that Mary and Joseph took to the stable. There's no room for them in the inn. How many times have we encountered or maybe had an opportunity to encounter God in our life, and we just kind of let God pass by, or we don't really acknowledge it. And maybe sometimes in retrospect, I mean, sure, the innkeeper afterwards probably thought to myself, I'm such a dummy.
Yeah, this would have been good for business.
This would have been fantastic.
Yeah.
And
Imagine
maybe
if I could
it's
have
still good
advertised
for
this.
business. Maybe
Yeah.
his sign says,
Yeah.
I'm the one.
Yeah.
I'm the one in the Bible.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the Yelp review.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now it actually costs more to stay in the barn.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It was my tool shed.
Yeah, turned me away on
Yeah.
this important night. But everything about the Jesus story is really something that how we live our faith too. We don't make time for God. We put these expectations like God is going to show up in these like big thunderbolt moments in our life, right? And God comes to us in the quiet. God comes to us in this humble birth of Jesus in this quiet night. And we don't look for those moments in our life.
Yeah.
We don't look for those quiet, humble moments where God is trying to invite us to come deeper in, right? We're looking for large signs.
Yeah, no, and I think what you said about like people are looking for that, and people were looking back then for like if you look at the other kind of mythologies or like an incarnation or that kind of event, God stepping into the world. There's going
Lightning
to be
bolts.
fanfare. There's
Yeah.
going to be whatever, and a lot of the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the previous emperors had like created their own mythology that they were born of the gods, that they had all these things, but that was what justified their position, their importance there. But God actually coming into the world, humbling himself, becoming like a small baby in the most humble circumstances you could think of at that time, as a prefiguration of a number of things that a prefiguration of the suffering on the cross, that like he comes into the world and leaves the world in a way that subjects himself to kind of the extremes of the human condition, or of but also we were speaking a little bit beforehand about like the fact that he is laid in a manger, or like manger is like manger, like that's
food trough.
a food trough.
Yeah.
So just like, especially as kind of Catholics, just like as a prefiguration of the Eucharist, he is like, he comes into the world in this really specific way that,
To feed sheep.
Yeah.
To feed his sheep.
Yeah.
And you were talking about also the city of Bethlehem.
Yeah, I have it on my phone somewhere here. If I can find it here. Where is it? All right.
Because you were saying that
Bethlehem in English means the house of bread.
right.
The manger, which was Christ's first crib, was also the lamb's feed box. And so if you think about it, the living bread was delivered to the house of bread in a food dish that his sheep could eat. Mm-hmm. It's kind of cool just if you think about it in that way. But yeah.
So, here we are. We celebrate Christmas every single year, and sometimes it takes a Christmas event to rejuvenate in us something worth celebrating, something deepening our spiritual life. We celebrate it all the time. I honestly, I give kudos to families this year who are celebrating Christmas, who are going to Mass, who are praying at home, because it's so easy to just stay at home and be lazy on Christmas Day.
Especially,
to stay up late and eat and drink, all good things to celebrate with people you love. But the point is that this monstrous event, this mega event that happened, is something that calls us to celebrate deeper, right? And it gets lost today in some of the commercialization of Christmas.
Yeah.
And so honestly, I give kudos to families who still make it a priority to get to Mass, to celebrate this Christmas Day. People have celebrated for 2,000 years or whatever it might be. You know what I mean? And I think it's not lost on us, even though a lot of the commercial side is taking over the noise of Christmas, right? And people go in debt at Christmas and all these things that aren't part of the original. Like you guys are saying, it's drawing us closer to God. It's drawing us closer to the Eucharist. It's drawing closer to the house of God, to the church.
It's funny how the world, like, and I've noticed this more, to be honest, as I moved out into the country. I'm not in the city so often and everything else, but like in the city, I didn't have a lot to do. And it felt like, to me, with a small yard and this and that and the other thing, that I needed more stuff just to keep myself entertained, to keep myself, you know what I mean? And in doing so, I would want to buy more. Christmas was a big time to buy stuff and to do things, and material was making me happy, But then moving out to the farm, I have so much extra to do. And what I'm realizing is the time I treasure now, like I was thinking, okay, what do I want? What I want a lot of times are gifts that allow me to be with my boys. Gifts that not gifts that will allow me to be by myself or to be, but gifts that like, oh, we can use this as a family and be together outside, because that's when we have the most fun. You know what I mean? That's when I enjoy life the most, when I'm with my boys and my wife and we're outside sliding, or we're outside cutting down trees. I know I'm getting a chainsaw for Christmas. But that's like one of the things that we do is like we'll be doing wood. So we'll be cutting down trees and a fence line and doing all that kind of stuff. But that was one of the things I was thinking, like versus a video game console where it's going to be me by myself, or more movies, or that kind of
I had this image of you like finding this chainsaw under the bed or something like that, and second guessing like if you should sleep next to your wife.
I'm really lucky she doesn't listen to the podcast, and my boys will listen to it, and then they'll tell her after Christmas.
Oh my gosh!
But yes, I may have found it already.
But I think that there is something to that like that we want to say, like it's we rightly critique the fact that a lot of our celebration of Christmas has kind of lost its substance in the commercialization and the busyness of just like the things we have to do, that we really have to work to be like, okay, no, like Mass is the thing, or like this we need to sort of cut out a lot of those distractions to properly focus ourselves on what. But I think, like, in some sense, it is a good thing that people are still celebrating Christmas, even though it's in kind of a reduced way, because there's some context there. There's like you have a framework that you can tell people you know what you're actually celebrating, or you know what, because even growing up, it was like,
but do people care anymore? Like I see what you're saying. Like people are celebrating in a reduced way, and that it's a conversation starter to say like, hey, do you know what you're actually celebrating? People don't care. They're like, it's Christmas. Like Christmas is no longer affiliated. Well, I shouldn't say no longer, like as in like it's no longer. But there are people who don't know, like there are kids who are celebrating Christmas who don't even know who Jesus is.
Yeah, and I was going to say that's my experience. So like growing up, I had no real kind of faith environment in my home. We celebrated Christmas, but it was very commercial. It was a good time. Like it was good to have family time, and it was good to kind of slow down and have some time off school and all these things. So that, as I was becoming an adult and asking these questions and looking into, like, I had something that I could plug.
Like a framework.
Yeah, that I could, plug the actuality of Christmas into, I guess. So I think, like, at a certain level, it's a good thing that we're still going through these motions. Yeah. Because when there is actual substance introduced, you have somewhat of a framework. And I think there are more and more things kind of alienating us from, the real Christian story, the real.
Yeah, that's great. Like that was your experience, like in my experience, we knew that Christmas was a religious holiday, right? And yet today, more and more, I'm seeing people celebrating Christmas like kids, like who's Jesus? Yeah. Like, that's like one of the worst. That's like one of the most heartbreaking questions, for me when a kid says, who's Jesus? It's really sad, but that's the reality. You look at any of the Christmas or any of the Christian holidays, not just Christmas. Yeah. You look at Easter and
see, I think it's easier then to evangelize, because if they have a misconception of who Jesus is, it's easy. It's easier to not have to redefine who Jesus is. If they don't have anybody, then you can be like, oh, well,
I see what you're saying. Yeah, because there's a lot of people who believe.
It's not a good thing, but it's not a good thing that people don't know. But it's kind of like, well, it is a chance for us to do our Christianly duty, which is evangelize.
And that's my point, right? Is like oftentimes there are these situations where people say, who's Jesus? And we're like,
don't.
Oh, but you poor thing.
Yeah.
When
instead of saying, come on in and sit down, and we say, oh, there's a stable in the back, go ask them. There's that church there, go ask them.
I think you're right. Maybe that is a framework for us to enter into conversation with people. But, I think too, it might be wise for us. You look at Christmas you look at prophets. We're talking about prophets in the Old Testament talking about the coming of the Messiah and leading up to the birth of Jesus. People are talking more and more about the coming of the Messiah. the event happens, word starts to spread, right? Word starts to spread about this Messiah is born. Remember, they send out the king, he sends out to go and kill every firstborn male, right?
He's
so
worried
word
that
is
someone's-
out.
yeah.
Word is out that there's a
And it's
Messiah in the
believed.
world.
I think this is another thing. It was believed. Herod believed it so much he went out and killed every male
single
under the-
male newborn.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's something that we don't talk a lot about in the church. That's why, like, that's the whole story about Joseph waking up, take Mary now, and go to Egypt, flee to
exactly.
Egypt. Like, he did that.
So word spreads. People are talking about it, and some people are saying, "You're crazy. That can't be. How can the Messiah now be here? Like, I'm alive in the time of the Messiah." And people are reassuring, like, "Yes, this is what's happened." Then you look at, after the death of Jesus, the resurrection, people are pointing towards that birth. So throughout history, we're always joining people who don't believe and reassuring them or telling them about the Jesus moment, right?
Yeah.
So today, maybe people have people around your dinner table at Christmas, or people in your homes, or people next to you in church. This is the feast where people are coming to church because they're forced to come.
Yeah.
Mom and dad forced them, or grandma forces them, or whatever, or it's tradition to just come on Christmas. Our duty as Christians is to spread this good news, that this humble birth that the prophets foretold that happened, at a certain time, at a certain place in human history. It's our duty to talk about it and to say why that's changed our lives. Not to reduce it to just Jesus' birthday, but to really share the fullness of it. God has become one of us because he wants to share in our life, right? And we have to share that with others as a sign of hope, as a sign of great things that God has in store for all people.
My suggestion to people is going to be to listen back to some podcasts we did on the Mass. And if you wanted to know how to talk to people specifically, then you got to introduce them to Jesus. And if that means they're coming to Mass with you, but they don't know what Mass is about, you need to have those answers. So go back and either do some research, or we did like a 3-part or 4-part series on the Mass a long time ago.
It was like a 15-part.
15 parts, yeah. But it was like a couple episodes in a row that we just talked about every part of the Mass. But if you educate yourself on that way you can be some of the guiding light for them. You can be that star of Bethlehem and point them towards Jesus.
I love it.
I don't
be that star of Bethlehem.
Point them towards Jesus. Get them there. And then have those answered questions. And if you can't answer all their questions, either point them to the podcast, point them to a priest, point them to someone who does have those answers.
Yeah, and recognize that the question, who's Jesus, is probably the most important question you can ask and should keep asking. Like even if you take the apostles, like the early disciples example, like when they're being called as fishermen, who's Jesus? Their answer to that question a couple years later is a bit different. During the Passion is a bit different. Read through the book of Acts, they're constantly asking, who's Jesus? And that's, the continuation and the deepening of their faith. So anytime we encounter people asking that question, that's an opportunity, to have that conversation, but to also continually ask it ourselves.
And the best thing you can do is to keep encouraging them, like the wise men. The wise men didn't just give up. They went to Herod. They couldn't find him. Thought, okay, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I got to go elsewhere. And they eventually found Jesus, right? So you got to keep encouraging them and pointing them towards.
So much about that Jesus event is so helpful for our lives today.
Yeah,
too,
100%.
Right?
It's
so much if you break down.
Reflects our life.
Exactly. The wise men searching for Jesus, the light that Jesus brought into the world. Those are the names of the Prince of Peace, the light of the world. These things are things that Jesus still brings to our life today. We are so way past our time here. We got to call it a quits. But it's Christmas, and people hopefully are listening to us with a cup of Baileys or something in their hands.
At least, maybe some rum and eggnog, whatever.
If they're still awake right now after listening to us. So that is our Christmas episode. So I want to wish you, Josh, and you, Matt, a very Merry Christmas. I hope you guys have a great time with your families.
Thank you. Same to you.
And make sure don't skip out on church. I'm going to be looking for you in the pews. Yeah,
you won't have music if I'm not there. And all our listeners too.
And all our listeners, we want to wish them a very Merry Christmas on behalf of our whole crew. Dave and Kevin and Sam and Ben and all of us here on that you see. We want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas. We're praying for you. Please pray for us too, and we want to wish you all the best this Christmas season. So for Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milligan, my name is Father Daniele. Merry Christmas, and we'll see you next time on the Catholic Buzz.